Anyways, hi, my name is Sarah. I'm a grateful believer in Christ, and I struggle with anxiety, trust, and insecurities. I was Hi, sorry. I was born in Rome, Georgia, to James and Robbie. I am the youngest of five in a blended family. I was also born into a home that suffered severe domestic abuse. My father tried to kill my mother on several different occasions and physically abused her daily. Um, My mother finally took myself and my two sisters and left my father when I was a year old. Trauma was what I was born into, and it would be the theme throughout my life. We didn't have a place to call home, and we bounced around to different family members in different places. We lived in cars, hotels, or wherever we could sleep for the night. My mom didn't have a job to support us, so I'm not really sure how we made it other than by the grace of God. There's a lot of details that I don't remember as a child, but I do remember a lot of traumatic things that would happen to us and would stay with me. Finally, we settled in a mobile home community, and I accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior at the age of 7 at VBS. But I had no idea what it meant. I didn't know how to live a godly life and did not have anyone to show me how to. We didn't attend church regularly, although my mother did believe in Jesus and my grandmother was definitely a very spiritual person. After we moved into the trailer park, my mom began to have grand mal seizures. This was very traumatic to witness, as sometimes she would have them while driving the vehicle. At the age of 10, my mother was diagnosed with brain damage resulting from domestic abuse from my father and multiple sclerosis. This would be the beginning of a long journey of change. My mother was what I would call a free will parent who let me wander and go wherever with no real idea about where I was at. During this time, friends introduced me to porn, smoking cigarettes, occasional parties, and sometimes inappropriate touches from boys and girls. I was bullied, hit by boys, and I suffered a couple of concussions from falling at the pool. And I was almost kidnapped by someone in the neighborhood. Absent parenting greatly impacted me. I was really traumatized. These experiences stay with me still to this day and greatly affect how I parent my own children. I found out what my dad did to my mom about the age of 9 and 10, and I asked him why he did it. He refused to answer and became violent with me. Anger and bitterness grew in me over time. And between the ages of 11 and 12, we moved in with my aunt and uncle to a farm far away from where I lived. The quiet and calm life didn't last very long, and about a year later, we moved again. While I was at 7th grade basketball practice, my sister showed up and said I needed to come home. We were moving. We moved to Rome, Georgia with my other aunt and uncle, and I had to start again in a new school in the middle of the year. My aunt was very strict and expected a lot out of me, and I honestly didn't know how to meet her expectations, so I didn't. The expectations of the family put on me was something I was not used to. I spent most of my life parenting myself. My immature mind didn't understand why they treated me the way that they did. Boys gave me good and bad attention. I was getting attention like I had never received before, and I liked it. Whether the attention was good or bad, it was the attention I longed for. While skating with friends, I met a much older man, Billy. He was 19 and I was 14. We immediately connected. I became friends with him and his siblings. I lied to my aunt and uncle and would ask to go see his sister. That was my way of seeing Billy without anybody knowing. And after a while, this led to me giving up my virginity to him at 14. I was so desperate to be loved, I didn't care who it came from. I thought I was in love. And a year after we had moved to Rome, we moved again. I was devastated. I didn't even get to tell this person goodbye. This time, we moved in with my older sister. She is 11 years older than me, and she was just married a few months before. And that year, problems began to erupt between her and her husband. I found a way to get in touch with Billy to tell him I moved, and my family finally found out about him. I began to devise a plan on how I could see him. We lived about 2 hours away from Rome at the time. He didn't push me to do anything because he knew he'd get in trouble because he was overage. So one night I decided I would take my sister's car. Didn't have my driver's license yet, but I knew how to drive. Even though I got caught the first time, I did it another 2 times. I got caught again, and I was taken to the police station. After this, my sister brought me home, sat me in front of my family, and became physically violent with me. My mother did nothing. No one did anything. I know what I did was wrong, but I felt very helpless. She grounded me and boarded up my windows, locked me in my room for 10 months. I couldn't do anything but go to school or to the bathroom. She called Billy in front of me and threatened him and made him tell me that he didn't love me and didn't want me. And after a while, I accepted what happened and began to spend a lot of time with God because I had nothing else to do, right? I surrendered my life to Jesus again. I truly felt I understood this time what that meant. I felt like a new creation, and in fact, I was a new creation. And after 10 months of being grounded, locked in my room, I was finally able to move freely about. I've sang my whole life off and on, but this was different. Singing began to be a real outlet for me. No one could take that away. Other drama happened, but I really relied on Jesus to get me through this. He was the only one I could go to about anything. Things slowly got better, and I realized things were very calm when I did everything that everybody wanted me to. And at 16, we moved again. We moved back to this with the same aunt and uncle on the farm, but this time my aunt was by herself. I started to attend youth group and became very involved. I helped as an older youth wherever I could, and I was so happy to be needed. I felt accepted and had so much fun with the youth. My aunt was difficult to live with, so I was happy to be away and in a calm atmosphere. Singing, again, was an outlet for me, and I sang as much as I could. I felt a lot of stress at home, and my body started catching up. I developed folliculitis that turned into cellulitis and then was hospitalized for 3 days. I had very few visitors and spent a lot of alone time there at 16. A month after being discharged, I developed spots again, and I laid my Bible over those areas. I prayed and believed, and the next day they were smaller and continued to disappear, and they have yet to reappear. God healed me, and I was so amazed at that, to physically see God's love and power. This was a huge turning point in my faith. Although things around me were so unsure, God was consistent, and I felt seen and heard by him. And this helped my faith grow. And even though my faith was growing, I still felt alone to a degree. I had no idea that wanting attention was still an issue for me. I would cling to whatever attention I was given to me, whether it was good or bad. And at 17, I began to date an older boy at church. Common theme here. After a year and a half of dating, he proposed. I thought this was God ordained. I was warned by some elders about marrying him, but I didn't care. There were a lot of red flags, but I ignored them. I found out that he had a porn problem, but he told me that he was taking care of it with God. We married in 2006. We had our ups and downs. I was codependent and didn't know it. I tried so hard to keep the peace and to people please, but I was not happy on the inside and cried a lot. My husband at the time made me feel like something was wrong with me because I cried so much. I didn't understand this at the time, but this was from so much trauma. My husband controlled everything, and I couldn't even buy a coffee without him putting me under the microscope. I was unhappy with my job, but my husband wanted me to stay because he liked the money it brought in. He barely paid attention to me. He was constantly filling our weekends up with people or video games. I eventually talked to him about starting a family, and he agreed we could start trying. After a year of trying, I found out I was pregnant. And the day after I found out I was pregnant, I started miscarrying. I was devastated. Not only was it super painful physically, but this was my little boy that God had promised me several years ago. Why would he give me a vision only for me to lose the baby? I felt depressed and hopeless. 2 months later, I became pregnant again. I was super nervous, but wanted to do everything right because maybe it was my fault that I lost the baby. I found out that I was having a precious baby boy due July 2010. I was so overjoyed. I cannot even explain to y'all the, the joy that I had that I was having that little boy that God had promised me. I was so in love with this precious gift. God did fulfill his promise to me, and I was thankful. I begged my husband to let me stay home, but he wouldn't. I felt really betrayed, and I missed my baby so much. I would visit him at lunchtime, and I would pick him up, and I would cry every day. Things escalated with my husband to more verbal abuse. He would say awful things to me and threaten physical violence. I would catch him watching inappropriate things and would tell him how much it hurt me, but it didn't seem like he cared. He only became more verbally abusive. Things continued to get worse. He would make comments about my weight, especially after I had Ethan. He would expect a clean house and food on the table, only to deny the food that I made and order out. I felt something was consistently wrong with me, and I just couldn't figure it out. He convinced me that something was wrong with me. Nothing I did made him happy. Ethan made me happy, though, my son Ethan. I loved God, and I didn't understand why he was trying me in this way. I was doing everything right, checking off all the boxes. I was staying true in my marriage, taking care of my son, trying to make my husband happy, attending church regularly. My husband began to continued to pay less and less attention to me. At this time, Facebook had kind of started up, and I started to connect with people that I lost contact as a kid because I moved around so much. I never really got to stay in contact with people. It helped to fulfill a need for communication and connection that my husband was not giving me. One day I saw a familiar face. It was Billy's brother. You know, that 19-year-old I dated as a teenager. Billy's brother said hello, and we conversated on Facebook. I gave him my number to share with his sister Ann since she wasn't on Facebook. I told my husband all about this, and he was not concerned. He was fine with it. He could have cared less. A few days later, I got a call from a random number. It was Billy. He asked how I was, and I told him that I was happily married. I knew that I was not supposed to confide in other men about my marriage, and so I made sure to say I was happy even though I wasn't. He proceeded to tell me that he loved me and he'd been searching for me for 10 years. I was in shock. I honestly didn't know what to say. My husband didn't show me love, but there was another person that had been looking for me for 10 years. I decided not to tell my husband about Billy telling me this. How would he respond? He was already verbally abusive. How would he handle this information? So that week, I continued to receive calls from Billy, and we would chat. I would feel awful, and then I would block his number. Then I would feel awful for being what I thought was mean, and then unblocking the number. I was inconsolable. I didn't understand why I was so upset. All I could think is I'm married to a man who treats me awful, and the man I'm not married to loves me. He's been looking for me all this time. And after a week, I finally decided to say something to my husband. I told him I was dealing with all these feelings, and I just didn't understand it. I still think there was feelings for this person, and I didn't know why or what to do. I needed help. I need you to help me. That's what I said to him. I didn't want to have these feelings. I didn't want to be separated from my husband. I wanted to stay married. I just didn't understand what was going on with me. He was in shock, but after a minute, he said, well, I've been unhappy for about 6 months, so maybe we should separate. Now I was in shock. I didn't want this. From then, the relationship deteriorated quickly. After 2-3 weeks of consistently arguing, I decided to stay with my sister for a week so that we could get out of each other's face, because all we were doing was arguing. All the fighting was starting to affect Ethan. We needed a little distance to talk properly to each other, I felt. And after a week of dealing with my feelings alone with God, I was able to understand how to put them all behind me. And I had begged God to free me of these feelings, and I felt free of it. I did not want to feel these things. So I called my husband. I said I was coming home to work on things. He demanded that I get counseling right away, but he didn't really want to be a part of the counseling. And when we got home, he asked me if I communicated with Billy. And I answered truthfully yes, but he didn't let me finish. Before I could tell him that I told Billy to never contact me again and that I wanted to work on my family and my marriage, he wouldn't listen or let me talk. He yelled at me that he was leaving. I got on the floor and I begged him not to leave, but he did. I was shattered. I thought I was doing the right thing, checking off all the boxes. Why was this happening to me? I decided if my mother was a single mom of 3, I guess I could do it with 1. I found out after he left, while I was at my sister's house for the 2 to 3 weeks, or the week, that he had been flirting with women at church and chatting online with them and trying to get their numbers. I was so hurt by all of it. I never intended for any of this to happen. I thought I was going to be the bondage breaker in my family. And then felt even more hurt that my husband was intentionally trying to hurt me. As the time passed, I began to feel a sense of freedom and release I had never felt before. I had no money. I had no job. It took me a year to find a job. And I didn't eat. I would eat Ethan's leftovers because I wanted to make sure he had something. I began to get a lot of attention from men, and I did not know how to handle it. I reconnected with a high school friend. He was so nice and fun in high school, I thought that this would be a really good catch-up. Because again, I moved around so much. It was nice to catch up with people. We talked for a week, and then we went out on a date. After the date, he raped me. I was in complete shock and honestly didn't know what to do. I didn't react at all. I felt betrayed by God and people, and I became even more bitter. I looked for jobs daily to support me and Ethan. I felt so ashamed by actions and the attention I continued to seek from men. This was at my lowest point. I got on my face and I begged God for forgiveness. I made a vow to God that I would not date anyone if I could not control myself and the attention I craved. I was going to starve this awful attention that I felt like I needed. I clung to Romans 8, especially verse 1. God told me that nothing could separate me from his love. I also begged him to please help me find a job. It was only by the grace of God that the light stayed on that year. I felt this victim mentality of why are all these bad things happening to me? But I was not truly spending time in God's word. I just kept thinking of why is God allowing this? Anxiety just continued to build. Why were people so cruel to me? There was no other, I've got a wrong sentence there, sorry. That December, after I made that vow, I met Andrew. It was by chance that I saw this handsome bearded fella playing the drums with a band. I was reluctant to like him because I had made a vow to God. He pursued me and things moved very quickly. I knew God must have had his finger in our meeting, even though we did things like moving in together before marriage. I had never felt so strongly about someone. Things seemed to be going great until they weren't. The things we both brought into the relationship began to surface, but we still pressed on because we didn't understand the impact of them. I still didn't understand why these things continued to happen to me. My victim mentality only helped me grow more bitter. Was I not praying or going to church? Okay, we lived together, but we were not intimate. I just couldn't seem to get away from the situations that caused more trauma. And then on New Year's Eve, he proposed. I couldn't have been more excited to share a life and a last name with the man of my dreams. I swept our problems under the rug because I didn't want to lose him. I was used to chaos and anxiety by this point. My whole life was filled with it. I was busy fighting battles for my son and put off fighting battles within myself. I was devastated to find out the things my future husband was bringing into our marriage. I felt a grief that I had never felt before. It was different than losing a marriage to divorce. I was blindsided. I was also disappointed with the things that I was bringing into the marriage: unforgiveness, resentment, and anxiety. We sought counseling, but not for long. This would only prolong the healing and reconciliation we needed. I began to try to control situations. If he wasn't going to guard his heart and his eyes, I would do it for him. So began my spiral down codependency lane. So if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. 1 Corinthians 10:12. We married January 2015. I was so elated to be married to the one my soul loved, but was also dealing with many fears and painful feelings. Anxiety crept in more and more. I complained to God, asked him to help me, but never once submitted to him. If there was one thing I learned thus far, I could only rely on myself. No one else, not even God. Even though he had healed me, I still didn't feel like I could rely on him. 9 months after our marriage, we welcomed our precious gift, Elise. I was trying to be the perfect wife and create perfect situations, but things still got worse. 2.5 years later, we welcomed our third precious gift, Renee, my ray of sunshine. Another added joy to our family. How could all these precious gifts be given to me and I still feel chaos consuming me on the inside? Am I not enough, God? Am I not doing enough? Why am I not enough for my husband? Why can't I make everyone happy? Why am I so unhappy? Why am I filled with so much fear and anxiety? I had been serving at East Ridge. This is a church I had dreamed of singing at for the last 10 years, and I was doing exactly what I dreamed of, but I was still didn't feel fulfilled. I was still consumed with anxiety. I could feel myself spiraling. I began to have severe anxiety attacks. I began to have health problems also. I developed cysts on my tailbone, and after suffering multiple flare-ups where it was very difficult to move, God physically healed me again. He healed me again physically after prayer, and I knew I didn't deserve that. How could God heal me and I be so weak in my faith? I felt so unworthy and humbled at the same time. I felt out of control and alone. But my friend Pam suggested CR, but I only came one time. This again prolonged my healing more. We ended up making a decision to move again and to have my father and mother-in-law move in with us, or father-in-law and mother-in-law move in with us. I definitely could not go to CR now. They needed lots of help health-wise, and it consumed all of our time. Even though I sincerely loved and still do, this was a huge added stress to our marriage. Jim was the best father-in-law a girl could ask for, but his health deteriorated fast. I was up all night trying to keep up with him wandering from his dementia-like symptoms and then up during the day trying to make sure that he didn't wander off. I was trying to be a good mom and a good wife to my husband. I honestly felt like I was losing my mind, and all the stress and no sleep didn't help. Our marriage was strained. I didn't think anxiety could get any worse, but it continued to get worse. I thought to myself, how on earth could this get worse? I tried to get therapy, but nothing seemed to really be working at all. I begged God to please help me relieve this awful anxiety. I was drowning. And after my precious father-in-law passed away, we moved again. I was so tired of fighting anxiety. My intention wasn't to control anyone. I honestly just wanted so desperately not to be in pain anymore, for no one else to hurt me. I didn't feel protected by anyone, so I felt the need to protect myself. I started going to a CR near me, but then I started coming here, and I committed to helping on Thursday nights once a month. And I felt God's tug to start coming here every Thursday. I joined a step study and an open share group, and for the first time, I felt so loved and accepted. I cannot emphasize that enough. I felt heard and wanted. There were people who struggled daily like me. I wasn't crazy, and I wasn't alone. I felt a relief that I have never felt before. I found my home away from home. I couldn't wait for Thursdays and still can't. I looked forward to step study, even though it was a lot of work. My sponsor and step study sisters are some of the most supportive women I know. They are there for me anytime I need them. I realized after the completion of my step study how different I was handling situations. And in my responses, in my willingness to give it to God, I am still a big work in progress. I am nowhere near perfect, although I would like to be. I struggle with anxiety and worry, but it's different now. The weight of it is much less. I am learning how to give it to God and to trust His plan for me. I'm also learning how to forgive, which has been very difficult for me with so much trauma. I have a long way to go, but I'm committed to not allowing anxiety rule my life or my marriage anymore. I'm thankful I have a partner in life who is willing to make commitments and work on this together with me in Christ. Our family is now praying and reading together. We attend church regularly, and I am happy to have served here at Eastridge the last 7 years. I am also thankful that God has healed my need for attention. I encourage you to find a growth group, open share group, accountability partners, and sponsor to help you through your journey of healing. Please get involved. You will only get out of it what you put in it. You are not meant to heal alone. God intended for us to be there for each other. You can do all things through Christ who strengthens you, but it's through his strength, so lean on him. Thank you for letting me share.